Good afternoon, everyone. I'm proud to be here today to speak about the State Department's ongoing mission to advance international religious freedom. This mission is not just a Trump administration priority, it's a deeply personal one. For many years, I was a Sunday school teacher and a deacon at my church, and that might sound unusual to a lot of folks inside the Beltway, but I'm one of millions of Americans and billions of people across the world who live in a knowledge of a higher power. I often humbly reflect on how God's providence has guided me to this office to defend this cause. I think about how, as an American, I've been blessed to enjoy the unfettered exercise of religious freedom, our first liberty here in the United States. But in much of the world, governments and groups deny individuals that same unalienable right. People are persecuted, handcuffed, thrown in jail, even killed for their decision to believe or not to believe, for worshiping according to their conscience, for teaching their children about their faith, for speaking about their beliefs in public, for gathering in private, as so many of us have done, to study the Bible, the Torah, or the Quran. Go into any mosque, any church, any temple in America, and you'll hear the same thing. Americans believe that kind of intolerance is deeply wrong. That's why the Trump administration has promoted religious freedom like never before in our foreign policy agenda. Given our own great freedoms, it's a distinctly American responsibility to stand up for faith in every nation's public square. So today I'm pleased to announce that here at the State Department, we're elevating the Office of International Religious Freedom along with the Office of the Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism within our organization. Effective immediately, each of these two offices will report directly to the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights. Sam Brownback, the Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, will continue to report directly to me. This reorganization will provide these offices with additional staff and resources and enhance partnerships both within our agency and without. It will empower them to better carry out their important mandates. Second, I'm pleased to announce the release of the International Religious Freedom Report for 2018. It's like a report card. It tracks countries to see how well they've respected this fundamental human right. I'll start with the good news. In Uzbekistan, much work still remains to be done, but for the first time in 13 years, it's no longer designated as a country of particular concern. This past year, the government passed a religious freedom roadmap. 1,500 religious prisoners have been freed, and 16,000 people that were blacklisted for their religious affiliations are now allowed to travel. We look forward to seeing legal reforms to registration requirements so more groups may worship freely and so children may pray at mosques with their parents. In Pakistan, the Supreme Court acquitted Asha Bibi, a Catholic, of blasphemy, sparing her the death penalty after she spent nearly a decade in prison. However, more than 40 others remain jailed for life or face execution on that very same charge. We continue to call for their release and encourage the government to appoint an envoy to address the various religious freedom concerns. And in Turkey, at President Trump's urging, they released Pastor Andrew Brunson, who had been wrongfully imprisoned on account of his faith. We continue to seek the release of our locally employed staff there. In addition, we urge the immediate reopening of the Halki Seminary near Istanbul. Look, we welcome all of these glimmers of progress, but demand much more. 2018, unfortunately, was far from perfect. As in previous years, our report exposes a chilling array of abuses committed by oppressive regimes, violent extremist groups, and individual citizens. For all those that run roughshod over religious freedom, I'll say this: the United States is watching, and you will be held to account. In Iran, the regime's crackdown on the Baha'is, Christians, and others continues to shock the conscience. In Russia, Jehovah's Witnesses were absurdly and abhorrently branded as terrorists as authorities confiscated their property and then threatened their families. In Burma, Rohingya Muslims continue to face violence at the hands of the military. Hundreds of thousands have fled or been forced to live in overcrowded refugee camps. And in China, the government's intense persecution of many faiths, Falun Gong practitioners, Christians, and Tibetan Buddhists among them, is the norm. The Chinese Communist Party has exhibited extreme hostility to all religious faiths since its founding. The party demands that it alone be called God. I had a chance to meet with some Uyghurs here, but unfortunately, most Chinese Uyghurs don't get a chance to tell their stories. That's why, in an effort to document the staggering scope of religious freedom abuses in Xinjiang, we've added a special section to this year's China report. History will not be silent about these abuses, but only if voices of liberty like ours record it. Finally, I'll just mention one more reason this report matters so much. It will inspire conversations leading up to our second annual Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom that I'll be hosting here in mid-July. This year, we'll welcome up to 1,000 individuals who will renew their zeal for the mission of religious freedom, and I'm proud to be one of them. I'm crossing the days off my calendar waiting for this. Last year was the first time in history that there had been such a foreign ministerial level conference on religious freedom. We brought together representatives and activists and religious leaders from virtually every corner of the world. It was truly a stunning show of unity, people of all faiths standing up for the most basic of all human rights. It was so successful that I immediately committed to hosting it the next year on the very day. Look, the good work that was done didn't stop at the end of that conference. Both the United Arab Emirates and Taiwan demonstrated impressive leadership by hosting follow-on conferences. And the International Religious Freedom Fund, which we launched to support victims of persecution and give groups the tools to respond, has already received millions of dollars. I'm looking forward to this year's ministerial being inspiring, and I know that it will be. And I'll now turn it over to my friend and our ambassador at large for international religious freedom, Sam Brownback, to take your questions. Thank you all.
The fight against religious freedom is mounting. Others report that 80% of people live in places where religious freedom is under attack. Yet most of the world organizes their life around a set of religious beliefs. They must be free to do so. The Trump administration has done exactly what it promised to do about making religious freedom a top foreign policy priority, and it is. We've jumped off the sidelines to fight for people of all faiths. This is because we believe there is no more important a time for the United States to promote religious freedom than now. We will not stop until we see the Iron Curtain of religious persecution come down, until governments no longer detain and torture people for simply being of a particular faith or associated with it, until people are no longer charged and prosecuted on specious charges of blasphemy, until the world no longer believes it can get away with persecuting anyone of any faith without consequences. We will not stop. I lead an incredible office of people who relentlessly work to advance religious freedom around the globe. Today's rollout of the 2018 report on international religious freedom was made possible by them. And I'd like to specifically highlight Bob Bohm, who heads up our report team, as well as all of our editors and numerous State Department officers and personnel in embassies and consulates around the world who diligently prepared these comprehensive reports. Every day of the past year and a half that I've been on this job, I've been grateful for this team and their commitment to this work. We've been working with foreign governments to help them organize their own conferences, to encourage a regional and context-specific look at religious freedom. We've increased our engagement with the NGO community, expanding a religious freedom roundtable on Capitol Hill, which I co-host every Tuesday that I'm in town. We've supported religious freedom roundtables starting up in other countries around the world. A grassroots movement for religious freedom is beginning to take hold around the world. We're seeing the fruit of our labor. President Trump led a government-wide effort to secure the release of Pastor Andrew Brunson. Pakistan released Asia Bibi after their Supreme Court upheld her acquittal of blasphemy charges. And as Secretary Pompeo said, Uzbekistan, for the first time since 2006, is no longer a country of particular concern. But the religious freedom central to our experience at home is still encroached upon in many areas of the world, as our 2018 report shows. For example, Iran has one of the worst records on religious freedom in the world and continues to show a blatant disregard for protecting individuals' religious freedom. Countless members of Iranian religious minorities, including Baha'is, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrians, and Sunni and Sufi Muslims, face discrimination, harassment, and unjust imprisonment because of their beliefs. Their religious books are banned, they are denied access to education, their cemeteries are desecrated, blasphemy and proselytization of Muslims is punishable by death. Last year, the Iranian regime violently cracked down on the peaceful protest of a Gaddafi Sufi dervishes in what Human Rights Watch called one of the largest crackdowns against a religious minority in Iran in a decade. To Iran, we say we are watching and we will stand up for all those whose right to religious freedom is infringed upon. China has declared war on faith. We've seen increasing Chinese government abuse of believers of nearly all faiths and from all parts of the mainland. In Xinjiang, China has detained more than 1 million ethnic Muslims in camps that are designed to strip away the culture, identity, and faith of these religious communities. We share reports again that others make that Chinese authorities have subjected prisoners of conscience, including Falun Gong, Uyghurs, Tibetan Buddhists, and underground Christians, to forcible organ harvesting. This should shock everyone's conscience. China also continues to interfere in Tibetan Buddhist practices and Tibetan culture, including by interfering in the selection, education, and veneration of Tibetan Buddhist lamas. They've increased their repression of Christians, shutting down churches and arresting adherents for their peaceful religious practices. And to this we say to China, do not be mistaken, you will not win your war on faith. This will have consequences on your standing at home and around the world. In Eritrea, authorities continue to confine Eritrean Orthodox Church Patriarch Antonios, who has been under house arrest since 2006. He, along with hundreds of other prisoners of conscience, should be freed. In Turkey, the government President Erdogan continues to keep the Halki Seminary closed, but calling them to let it be reopened. And in Nicaragua, religious leaders report constant surveillance, intimidation, and threats. The National Police assault priests in full daylight, revealing the government's contempt for any religious leaders they view as a threat to their authority. The United States cannot secure religious freedom alone. We need everyone's help. Everyone has a stake in the fight. That's why this year's second Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom is more important than ever. We expect this year's event to be bigger, broader, and better than last year's groundbreaking event. The continuing and complex challenges to religious freedom demand an even greater stage with more stakeholders working together to identify solutions. The Ministerial will also provide a platform to amplify the voices of survivors of religious persecution, these from around the world, whose stories will demonstrate the unrelenting power of faith. Our work is still cut out for us. We must move religious freedom forward around the world. We look forward to working with other governments and our partners in civil society and the religious community to do just that.